Hello and welcome. It's 3:10 to left. Tom Caron along with Alex Speier of the Boston Globe. And if you're a seamhead like Alex Speier, this is the best of times and the worst of times, right? I mean, the All-Star game is great, but there's no Red Sox baseball to watch and dive into. And Alex, what do you do during the All-Star break? How do you handle? Is it a reset? Is it an opportunity for you to refresh and regroup, or is it actually you're spending more time doubling down on numbers and getting ready for the second half?
No, it's pure chaos from a number of vantage points. Not only do I travel on an annual basis to the Futures game and then the MLB draft and then the All-Star game, but on top of that, I usually travel to the first series out of the All-Star game. And in between those two things, I usually try to have my family come out wherever I'm going to be covering a game for a little bit of a trip. So I am running around Los Angeles, and I will be running around Los Angeles in the next coming days, out of the All-Star game tonight, and going to places like Universal Studios. And so it is not a restful time, but it is not a stat-driven time either.
Well, that's good to hear. And it's interesting, right, that the Red Sox start the post All-Star run in LA against the Dodgers. Obviously, so much of the two franchises are intertwined, going back to the 2018 World Series and ever since. But it is, it's an intriguing second half. The Red Sox have played themselves into contention. The trade deadline is now coming sooner. It's July 30th this year. So going to be really interesting to see how the coming weeks play out.
Well, yes, and I feel first of all I feel remiss in not having asked you about what island you'll be sailing to during the
Yeah,
All
I
Star
got
break.
nothing. It is the All-Star break is my time away, and I'm taking the late games off. The Dodgers and Rockies. I don't like 1 a.m., 2 a.m. post game show start times, so I've built up enough seniority that I can take those off. And poor Adam Pellerin will get stuck with the early morning wee hour post game show. And yeah, I'm here in Maine. I'll be sitting here for the next couple of weeks, looking at sunsets and going out on the boat and getting away from it all. I'll tell you this: the Sunday that just passed, final game before the All Star break. I am now as close to the little kid I was on Christmas morning as I am the Sunday morning before the All Star break. Just knowing that we've got a few days off and that we all get to catch a breather and that there's good stuff coming. Like we said, that this team is in a race and it's not cut and dry what they'll do yet at the trade deadline, but it's going to be the last couple of years. It's kind of the trade deadline. Are they really going to invest in this team? It seemed like each of the last 2 years, right, felt like they had a chance when you were talking about them in July, but it was kind of a flickering chance at best, where this team really feels to have started the progression of becoming a playoff franchise once again, which is really exciting stuff.
It's so fascinating. The similarities in terms of where they've gotten to in the standings is really interesting to monitor, right? In 2022, I think that they got up as high as either 10 or 11 games over 500. In 2023, they were up at 9 games over 500 in the days leading up to the trade deadline. The baseball season tends to turn quickly, and it's jarring in July. It is a fascinating time of the baseball calendar where the buy-sell decisions do shift on a week-after-week basis. One of the most prominent examples, since we're talking about the Dodgers, having come in 2019, when the Red Sox, coming off the World Series, had been very meh all season. They hadn't really found their footing. Then all of a sudden, they won 5 out of 6 games against the Rays and they won against the Rays and maybe the Astros. I'm trying to remember the other series in the middle of that season. And so all of a sudden, they went from thinking about trading Mookie Betts and thinking that there would have been a chance that they could have acquired Will Smith from the Dodgers at that time, to saying, no, we've won 5 out of 6. Mookie just hit 3 home runs in a game. We are not going to be sellers at this year's deadline, and we're going to write it out and give this group a chance to defend its title. And they did, of course, and then ended up trading Mookie for not Will Smith in the offseason.
Right. Fascinating, right? How these projections can change so quickly. By the way, Craig Breslow is going to join us. We sort of buried the lead there. Craig Breslow, Chief Baseball Officer, is going to join us on the show here. And we'll talk about projections, but I find projections fascinating, right? Because that is, at the end of the day, it's kind of the starting point. It's not the be all end all, but you look at it, again, I look at Fangraphs every day, and they were, I think 5 weeks ago, I think they were around 15% in Fangraphs projections of making the playoffs. Now they're hovering around 50%. That is a remarkable 6-week stretch.
It's a huge about face, and I'm going to get back. I'm going to borrow the Tom Caron soapbox and jump back and jump on it because I'm short, and because I think that it's really, really important to underscore that publicly available projections are not necessarily what the teams are working with. They're based on they're based heavily. They're weighted towards what a player has done throughout his career rather than has he taken a different developmental step forward. So if you view Tanner Houck as being as projecting as the all-star version of himself for the rest of the season, then you are going to assume that the Red Sox, then there's a good chance you view the Red Sox as being better than the projections that exist for them in those publicly available fora. If you view Jarren Duran as having made a meaningful career step forward, maybe because of the leg kick or maybe because of just familiarity with the league or what have you, then you're going to think that he can outperform the remaining season projections, which in turn would help the Red Sox to surpass even those projections that are on the table for them, right? So there are a lot of different ways to think about this, and the publicly available ones don't take in all of the different factors that you would think a team is going to be considering in evaluating whether or not they are indeed positioned to compete for a playoff spot.
It's such a great point, right? Because, again, I talk about Fangraphs. Well, Fangraphs is going to sort of revert to their preseason player projections, right? They still think, to your point, that is the player. That Tanner Houck is a guy who has to prove if he's a starting pitcher or really. And as we sit here in July, that's not who Tanner Houck is. Now, we'll see. As my microphone goes, I got very excited. We will see, is he the first half all-star over the course of the second half? Or does he revert to who he was, right? I mean, and that really is, at the end of the day, what Craig Breslow and his staff have to figure out for themselves, right? Who are these guys? What is this team that we're going to either invest more in or not? But he has said, and we're going to ask him about this, but he has said time and again that it's got to be one or the other. That and Chaim Bloom probably got himself stuck the last couple of trade deadlines trying to thread the needle, trying to do a little bit of both. And in the end, they didn't make the playoffs either year.
There were probably issues with regards to clarity throughout the organization, and that some of that was above Chaim Bloom and what he felt his job was, and some of that was from him, and part of that was from elsewhere, partly from the team's performance, and the team not necessarily picking a decisive lane, not by being kind of back in the on the fringes of the wild card race rather than squarely in position for a postseason spot. So there are a ton of variables that have to be weighed through, but it's been, I'll give Craig Breslow this. He has been incredibly consistent about this pick a lane question, right? Like, we have heard him say it time and time again. It probably requires a little bit of clarification, which we will seek regarding what exactly that means. But he has made very clear that there is that you gain clarity by treating this as an either or time of year rather than a both time of year.
No doubt about it. And when they start playing again in LA, there's only 12 days left before he has to make some decisions. At some point over those 2 weeks, these 2 weeks, it's going to be very interesting. So let's get to it. Let's hear what he has to say. It is Craig Breslow, Chief Baseball Officer of the Boston Red Sox, our all-star break guest on the 310 to Left podcast. It's the unofficial midway point of the season, though we are well beyond the midway point of the season. But we're not here to do math. We're here to talk baseball with Chief Baseball Officer Craig Breslow. Craig, thanks for joining us this week.
My pleasure. Thank you guys for having me.
An interesting time, a busy time, right? The draft happening, the trade deadline looming. and your team playing well. In your first go-round running an entire baseball operations department, what have these last few weeks been like for you? I remember the beginning of the season, you said, it's going to take time here to get up to speed. Well, you've had some time to get up to speed, but now you've got a lot of things looming and happening. What is the month of July like as chief baseball officer?
Yeah, so it's obviously hectic. Once the draft was moved to July, and you don't get the break between the draft and the trade deadline to recover a bit, and it's kind of a sprint. But I think of the three things that you just talked about, the draft, the trade deadline, and our team playing really well, I think the conversation definitely needs to start with what's happening on the field. Really exciting run of baseball over the last couple of months, guys. Playing really hard, keeping us in ball games, winning a bunch of games, and I think more than anything, starting to see this young, athletic, dynamic core really start to emerge.
We don't have access to your projections, but we can, flip over to Fangraphs on a daily basis and watch the playoff odds go up and up, right? Drastically improved from a month ago, right? Because of the way this team is played. As you wind down the calendar to your first trade deadline as chief baseball officer, talk a little about that prospect. Not telling us your projections per se, but how that factors in, how those are constantly changing. And as you said, you got to pick a lane, right? When you get to the trade deadline, how much do those projections ultimately direct you to pull over to the right or go to the left and get in the breakdown or passing lane?
Sure. So, I think the projections can serve as kind of an anchor to keep you somewhat grounded, somewhat realistic. But I think, it's also easy to overstate the importance of trying to distill this down to a single number, a single projection, given that there are so many different considerations that you have to be mindful of when figuring out exactly which lane it is that you need to pick. I think we have to think about the returning players, getting guys like Cassis and Grissom back and the impact that they can have, and then the continued development of the guys who have emerged in the big leagues and what we should expect of, the Durans and Rafaelas and Hamiltons and Abreus going forward. And then also just kind of where we are in terms of the development cycle of a baseball operation, right? We talked a ton about the young players, many of whom I just mentioned, and would add, Wong and Devers, who is still a young guy, and many others, and the development of the pitching group as reason for optimism, as reason to to see that maybe accelerating kind of this window is where we are. But we also have to be realistic, and we have to be responsible. And I think, I talked through the offseason about an unwillingness to trade future wins for now wins. But certainly what's happening on the field is a reason to evaluate all of these things. And maybe the last thought here is, when I took this job, my hope was that I was going to be, sitting in this seat in July, thinking that, we're playing meaningful games. We see the opportunity to play meaningful games down the stretch, and the opportunity to, continue to invest in the team is one that, was in front of us and could make sense. And that's the role, I think that's the position that everybody in this job wants to be in, where, year after year, you recognize that the deadline is a chance to improve your team.
I would love to dig into the part about the question of trading 2024 wins for future wins, which was kind of explicitly stated throughout the offseason. Some of the public speculation surrounding your kind of your suggestions that the picking of a lane will happen, but you're not there yet, has meant people. There's been an assumption on the part of some that means you aren't at a point where you would think about trading future wins for 2024 wins. Is that inaccurate? Are you open-minded now to the idea? Has the play of the team through the first half of the season suggested to you that you at least have to consider trading future wins for now wins?
I think I have to be open-minded, right? I think, as easy, as convenient as it would be to say, hey, this is the plan in February, and we are going to adamantly adhere to it, irrespective of anything, kind of that might come up that would force us to change is just so unlikely to happen. It would be irresponsible. It would be foolish. I think those that I have seen have success in this position have the ability to be nimble, to adapt, and to factor in all of the considerations that one needs to be mindful of when approaching a trade deadline.
So along those lines, it's interesting to me to look back a year ago when you were still with the Cubs front office, and that was kind of a wild ride, right? Like in the month leading up to the deadline, everyone in the world thought that you guys were going to be sellers at the All-Star break, and then you guys rip off an 8-game winning streak and end up being buyers, acquiring Candelario as one of the biggest position players available. Can you take me through that is that part of the reason why you haven't identified the lane that you're going to travel, just the prior experience that you have in terms of the U-turns that are possible in the month of July?
Yeah. Well, I think to some degree we're all shaped by our experiences, right? And that's the most recent for me. But nonetheless, I think what it took was an appreciation for all of the information that we had in front of us, and that information was changing every single day. And I think it's a good reminder not to get so overly caught up in playoff probabilities day to day, because with every game that you play or every game that someone that you might be chasing or who's chasing you is plays, those fluctuate. And I think you have to zoom out a bit and kind of try to see the big picture. And when your team goes on a run and wins 8 games in a row, that has to matter. That has to be meaningful. Again, we're here to try to win as many big league games as we possibly can, and not to it's building out a robust, healthy farm system is one path toward sustainability, and we have to be mindful of that. But at the end of the day, we're not here to win farm system rankings. We're here to win big league games.
And so, Craig, as you've gotten immersed here over the last 6 months, your relationship with ownership develops, right? And you get to know each other better. Talk about the conversations as they happen now. How involved? What kind of guidance? Is it you going to them to sort of lay out your vision? Is it then coming to you? Here's what we're thinking. And of course, the question we always have to ask: where does Theo factor into all of this as you get near a trade deadline?
Yeah, well, I saw Theo on this podcast a few weeks ago, right? So you guys are pretty attuned to his whereabouts as well. No, Theo is obviously a great resource. As with respect to approaching a deadline, to the numerous considerations that need to be factored in here, to providing me insight, sometimes in terms of more day-to-day minutia, and often more just kind of big picture. Obviously a guy with an incredible resume of success in this sport and in this city. But in terms of my relationship communication with ownership, I try to be as proactive as possible, and kind of lay out, how I'm thinking about this, the different approaches that we can take. And, look, there are a limited number of paths here, right? There's, kind of add to the team. There's, trade away from the team, and then there's do nothing. And I am adamant about picking a lane, and kind of will remain so. But ownership is incredibly engaged. Our interactions day to day are typically focused on the team and the game and the events. But John and Mike and Tom and Sam and Theo are, they're watching every single pitch, and we're commenting on, Cutter's efficiency last night. The ability for Rafi to hit a ball, about a foot and a half outside, 420 plus feet in New York. And so, I think they are enjoying this successful run as much as we are.
I always find there's the micro and macro to an extent as you approach a trade deadline, right? What the team is doing on the field will ultimately dictate where you go, how you improve, or if you sell, right? But there's also sort of where the organization is, where the franchise is. And it's an interesting time right now in Red Sox Nation, right? The fans, they just want to see you spend. I think if they had their way, you would just tell them you're going to spend as much money as possible and everyone's going to be happy, which is obviously not the goal. The goal is not to have the highest payroll. That's not what you set out to do. But does that factor in? Where does sort of this point in time of the Boston Red Sox, does that factor into anything, or do you have to make sure you're blocking that out and solely focusing on what this group of players is doing on the field right now?
Well, I would take probably those comments about fans just want us to spend a step further and say, I think fans just want us to win. I think if we were to win, which is our goal, that is our mission here, and by far our most important North Star. I think generally the fans in Boston support that. And if we were to spend a ton of money and lose, my guess is they would be frustrated and rightfully so. I think the most important thing that I can do is anchor myself to what I believe is best for the organization. And what's best for the organization is often balancing what's best in the short term and what's best in the long term. And it's a really difficult line to straddle. But this is a really difficult job. But I think one thing that's important to call out here, I think, is that we all kind of have different jobs. Whether it's the ownership group or me or Alex and our coaches or our players, right? I think our players are rightfully consumed with doing everything they possibly can to prepare to win tonight's game. I think Alex and the staff are doing everything that they can do to review the information, to understand the matchups, to think through the right pinch hitting opportunities and bullpen matchups in order to give us the best chance of winning a game. Almost independent of who the 26 guys are on the roster in the clubhouse on any given day. And my job is to try to equip them with the best 26 players that we can find. And so, when you appreciate that kind of nuance, everyone has a job that they can do. And while there's interactions across all of us and a ton of communication, I think to some degree that those jobs are almost independent in a way. And I think that can be refreshing.
To me, it was one of the things that's interesting to hear is some of the metaphors that you've employed, which seem contradictory, right? Like, straddling the line for the past, for the present, and the future is one, and yet picking a lane is another. This is a difficult way of driving, and yet I suppose eventually you'll get to one of the lanes as you straddle that line. But one question that's been raised with regards to figuring out those two things is whether or not there's a scenario in which you could trade guys who are pending free agents, yet address longer term needs, and whether or not that would represent picking a lane, or whether or not that would represent kind of the muddle that you've been trying to avoid. What are your thoughts on that?
I was thinking there's some metaphor here, so it's like driving in the shoulder or something. I'm not sure, but
watch out for the rumble strip.
I think right. So I think that at the risk of overcomplicating this, I think you can try to balance short and long term. I think you can move the organization in the right direction, but you have to be convicted in the short term execution of whatever the steps are that will get you there. And that's what I mean by picking a lane. Now, conceptually, it sounds great to balance those things out by kind of doing the buy, sell, add, and subtract. I think what often happens when you try to go down both paths is you end up with neither. It's really, really complicated to successfully execute that. And so, to me, the one thing that, we need to do is determine what we are trying to accomplish and be completely convicted and decisive in accomplishing that. And the one thing that the team can do to help us, make that determination is win as many games as possible over the next 3 or 4 weeks.
One of the things that question of winning and what kinds of needs you are trying to solve for is identifying what needs you're trying to solve for, right? So it is interesting to step back a little bit and think about not just the present state of the roster, but I think that there would be a suspicion that perhaps you guys, if you were picking the more 2024 wins now, you would probably look to pitching and maybe right-handed hitters. Those also seem to be longer term needs in the organization. When you look at the overall structure of the upper levels of the minors, where obviously you have an elite prospect group forming in the upper levels that's on the position side, but that hasn't been balanced out necessarily on the pitching side. But again, those top prospects that everyone keeps talking about, particularly Marcelo Meyer and Roman Anthony and Kyle Teal, all happen to be left-handed, like so many of your big leaguers. Is it safe to say that that those, as you identify both short-term and long-term areas of need, that those things are actually kind of married for you?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And obviously, as you approach the deadline, players that can accommodate longer term needs also come with significantly higher asking prices. And, we have to be prepared to address those needs regardless, I think, to your point. There's no hiding the fact that we are skewed toward position players, and particularly left-handed hitting position players, and balancing that out is something that we've been mindful of since I got here 6 months ago. And I think the opportunity to add pitching, whether that is pitching that can impact our major league team immediately, or pitching that we believe has the ability to impact our major league team at some point in the future, is something that we should always be targeting. I don't think anyone would ever claim that they have enough pitching, and we're certainly operating from a deficit, especially when you consider injuries to Witt and Giolito and others. And so if we can address short and long-term needs in a single transaction, like, we should absolutely be open to considering that. It's just very, very difficult to execute.
I should ask, where do you feel the organization is at in terms of its pitcher development? Because we've seen, obviously, Tanner Houck and Cutter Crawford make significant steps forward in terms of what they've seen in terms of where they've been in the first half. We've seen Brian Bayo at least taking the ball and making adjustments and learning sometimes through lumps. At the upper levels, where we're seeing maybe a Richard Fitz, taking steps forward at times. Some of the guys, whether through injury or underperformance, other top pitching prospects haven't necessarily. How do you assess where the organization is on the pitching front?
Yeah, so I think we tend to take this top-down look, right? And there's been some early wins with our major league staff, and absolutely, Andrew and the rest of the group and the pitchers themselves deserve a ton of credit for, not just being open-minded and curious, but buying in and executing on all of the things that Andrew and the rest of the pitching group have been pushing. But I also think that there are some changes, some developments kind of under the hood that may not manifest for some time. The job that Justin Willard has been doing, our director of pitching, starting with players at the academy in the DR, and in Florida, I think has been really solid in just kind of instilling the right movement patterns and strength, and allowing these guys to mature physically. There's definitely been a push to build out stuff, both pitch shapes and velocity. And I think we're seeing some of that through the organization. And then there have been some, individual wins that are worth calling out. Certainly, Fitz, over the last couple of weeks, the velocity's ticked up. Some tweaks to the pitch shapes. Sandlin, the return in the Schreiber trade since a brief stint on the IL with a forearm strain, has been really, really good over the last couple of weeks. We're seeing upper 90s velocity, a wipeout breaking ball. And then obviously before he got hurt, Perales looked like he had really burst onto the scene. And there are some other players who have had some challenges. Guys like Wickelman Gonzalez, who was a kind of prized pitching prospect coming into the season, has had some struggles. Hopefully we can get him straightened out. But some others who have emerged as well, whether it's Early, Dobbins, Weehan, a handful of guys that I think you can point to and say, we're starting to lay the foundation for a pitching development pipeline.
All right. Well, we all know one of the biggest looming free agents is your manager, Alex Cora, right? And assuming no matter where you are projection-wise, you're probably not going to trade him because you don't have control over him after the season. You've both made it clear that the conversation will be after the season, right? That has been said by both. He's done, obviously, a remarkable job with a young team, keeping them focused, keeping them going. Any thoughts of re-engaging in a dialogue with him before the end of the season, or at any time before or after the trade deadline?
Yeah, I think Alex and I decided early on that the worst possible outcome here was for this situation to become a distraction, and I think he deserves a ton of credit. I think the organization deserves credit for not allowing that to become a distraction and to allow the players on the field, their progress, their development, and ultimately the games that we're winning to be the story. That's the way that it should be. I think that's the way that both of us want it to be, and so any conversations that that would take place, would take place just between Alex and me to ensure that to be the case. But I think the thing that is worth highlighting here is the job that he's done in terms of managing, a ton of turnover, overcoming injuries, that overseeing the development of young players in the big leagues, and ultimately having us positioned where we are right now, which is 9 games over 500, currently holding a playoff spot, and looking forward incredibly optimistically to the next few months.
So I'll ask on that front. You're living it now, right? Like, you are commuting from home and you are in the office all the time around people who care about these wins and losses, right? Like, it's a little bit different than when you were remote with the Cubs and you were checking in with Jed Hoyer every day. But nonetheless, you're not like that. It's different. It's different being in the environment. What is this season like? What is it like? Kind of living with the wins and losses on a day-to-day basis and being back in that environment as you were during your playing career.
Yeah, well, there's a unique vibe around Fenway, especially when the team is performing well. It's a really, really exciting place to be. I think we saw, I can remember the kind of back-to-back Yankees and Phillies series where we played well. And the stadium was electric and felt like, the fans had really come out to support what they were seeing on the field. And it was just an incredibly fun, time to be around the stadium. Now, I've also seen the other side of that where, we've had some bad losses and played poorly, especially early in the season where we're making a ton of errors. And this is, kind of the last place that you would, you'd want to be hanging around. And so I think that's why it's important that I, try not to get caught up in the day-to-day wins and losses in terms of decision making. Like, I'm absolutely invested in this team and in our wins, and I think everyone, you could walk into the office and you would know if we had won or lost the day before. But to the extent that it impacts decision making, I think that can be a pretty poor environment in order to make consistent, disciplined decisions. So I think it's important to kind of separate those two things. Now, if you were to glance up in the suite after a big hit or a bad error, you would see a reaction from me. But I have to quickly kind of transition out of that and be a little bit more disciplined when it comes to making decisions around the team.
Will you ever we got about a minute left. Will you ever go full Billy Bean and just turn away from the game, not let yourself get caught up in the moment? Or does the fan still come out of you during the game?
Yeah, I don't see myself ever getting there. I try not to have to get up and go to the bathroom in the middle of a game because I don't want to miss don't want to miss a pitch. I'm not saying that's the best way to operate, but it's where I am right now. And I think at the end of the day, what I will always point to is the fact that, there is such a passionate fan base here. There are such high expectations. That's why nobody wants to miss a pitch. That's why people enjoy coming to every single game. And the opposite or the alternatives, apathy, disinterest, those are far, far worse. So it's a challenge that I welcome.
Well, we appreciate the time. It's been really fun watching this team come together, and we're in July, and it's all meaningful, and that's all you can ask for. And it's a busy time for you. Craig, we really appreciate the visit. Thanks for the time.
You got it. Thank you, guys.
Well, a great conversation. Always is when you have time. I feel like he really does, he's pretty transparent about his thoughts. And now, again, it doesn't tell us where they're going because it's still somewhat too early to tell. But I thought that there was a lot of interesting stuff there, Alex.
Yeah, I agree, and I agree on the subject of transparency. Right, there's not been hiding the ball with regards to strategic decisions in the off season. He was clear about the idea that that they weren't going to sacrifice future wins for 2024 wins, and now we're getting to a point where where he's acknowledged that they have to be open to reconsidering that again. He is he is he has not picked the lane. He is straddling the line right now, or in the shoulder, or I don't know, weaving in and out of traffic. It's But there will come a point where those traffic metaphors are no longer convoluted, and where there's a distinct decision. It sounds like.
I feel somehow we've started an auto racing podcast. I don't believe Nesson has one, so maybe that'll be our next calling. Our producer Carolyn also had a really good point that I'm starting to lose it each week on this show. I knocked over the microphone earlier. I set off fireworks somehow in last week's edition. So the urgency and the intensity of this baseball season are ratcheting up, Alex.
As is evidenced by the towels that are behind you, and as you prepare
Yes.
to go to the beach. Living
we are
the
waiting
TC life.
to go on the boat. That note is from my wife Kelly saying, "Shut up and come meet us on the boat." So I will have to do that shortly as we get to it. So all right, so you are Craig Breslow in a minute or so or less. What is, if you got to do one thing, what would you be adding to this team, or what, or not adding? What is the one move, the first move, the most important move you would make?
Going after controllable pitching would be the highest priority for the organization. That's also the hardest thing to do, especially at the deadline. And we've seen very few of those guys moved in the last couple of years. But there's the question of where guys are in terms of durability for the course of the year as they hit innings career highs. And then beyond that, there are going to be questions about the state of the rotation entering 2025, when, Nick Pivetta is a free agent after this season. You're waiting to see what Lucas Giolito and Garrett Whitlock look like coming back. So there's a gap there, and so that's, I think, at the top of the wish list, but it's not necessarily that's also like saying at the top of my wish list is a stack of $1 million. It's not necessarily going to I'm not necessarily going to be finding that.
I get an easier one and a more controllable one. Sign Alex Cora. I think it would be a remarkable, and again, I don't think it's going to happen. I think both sides made it clear they're not going to let this. But you know what? Drop Craig Counsell money on the table. Peter Abraham wrote about this in the Globe. Just throw it out there and see. I think Ken Rosenthal wrote about it the other day as well. And I don't think you could ask a manager to do a better job than Alex Cora has done with this team. And I think with 2 weeks to go in the trade deadline, if you announced today that Alex Cora was the manager of this team for the next few years, it would A, send a message to the fan base, and B, maybe send a message to potential teams and trade partners and free agents after the season that, this is what the future is going to look like. It give this organization a little stability that I think fans have been looking for a little while.
Yeah, well, I think we've arrived at a point where Alex Cora has proven an awful lot as manager. The fact that he won with a veteran team, with a really good young core that just needed that final step in 2018. The fact that he took a reassembled, largely kind of free agent assembled team in 2021 and got it to the ALCS. The fact that now we have all of a sudden, the team havoc running around with the Red Sox, and winning by running and with athleticism and just very different demographics while developing. I think that he's checked off a lot of boxes. If there was a question entering the year about whether or not he should be viewed alongside a guy like Craig Counsell as a managerial elite, I think that's been pretty clearly answered over the course of the first half of this season.
I agree. All right, you're going off to the West Coast. Enjoy the late night games. It'll be prime time where you are, so it's a lot easier to handle West Coast baseball when you're on the West Coast. That's one thing I've learned over these years. It's the studio work. So I thank Adam Pellerin for stepping in and taking one for Team Caron as we get a little time away. So safe travels, Alex, and we will see you again next time.
Best of luck on the boat.
Thank you. We'll see you next time on 310 to Left.